Something's not quite right here. What is it? Hello everyone, my name is Oskar from Virtual Vechtschule, and in this video I will be talking about fencing Messer as a left-handed person or against a left-handed person. This turns any Messer engagement into a cross-handed fight, and things really get quite differently as a result, and to be honest, also quite a bit weird. In medieval and early modern fight books, this may not have been so much of an issue, because left-handed people got written out of those pretty thoroughly, so there's not much of a cross-handed fight going on there. But in a modern context, you might find yourself joining a Messer tournament and then finding out on the day itself that the 4 other people in your pool are all left-handers. No, this totally did not happen to me a few months back. So anyway, in a modern context, being able to fight cross-handedly is actually quite important. So let's see if we can make this topic make some sense. Now, when coaching left-handed fencers and playing with them, I found that it's generally quite doable to adapt what you already know to work in a cross-handed engagement. So in order to demonstrate that, we'll be looking at 4 different kinds of adaptations that you can do to your fencing to work in cross-handed fight. And I'll be demonstrating that together with Pim, who's one of my left-handed fellow instructor and clubmates. Before we begin though, a lot of movement patterns and tactics are barely affected by a cross-handed fight, if at all. Examples of this are, for instance, the windings, working with long point. But it's usually getting to such techniques which is a lot harder. So that's why we'll be looking quite a bit at the opening strategies provided by the Verborgenhauen, or hidden cuts, as described in Hans Lekkusen's fight book. The first adaptation that we can make is switching sides. There's some techniques that can be as easily done on one side as on the other. Sure, there's often some minor mechanical differences between both sides, but they're small enough to not make a huge difference. The Entrusthau, or Tverhau for all of you longsword barbarians, is a great example of this. Normally, when you want to make a quick combo, you start with one from your dominant side and then from your non-dominant side. But here's the interesting thing. Your opponent's parry is definitely stronger on one side than on the other. So when you fence someone with the same dominant hand, their strong block covers their non-dominant side and their weak parry is on their dominant side. My first Entrusthau may therefore not land, but the second definitely has a good chance. If I try this in a cross-handed engagement though, I will likely just fail. Starting with the other Entrusthau though really increases my chances of success again, back to where they were if I'm fighting a non-cross-handed fight. So that's one. Up next, we sometimes find that we have to change a technique a bit. Some techniques are inherently only functional on one side. They technically can exist on your other side, but they somehow just don't work all that well. The Zwinger, or Schielhauen longsword, is a good example here. The Zwinger is great for covering your non-dominant side. Cutting it towards your dominant side, in my case the right, will not work quite as well, and I also found that there was a lot of undue strain on my thumb. In this case, you can change the technique a little to still make it work. You can, for instance, use an Absetzen against the cut to your dominant side. It still fills the same tactical role, which is in this case to have a prepared closed eyes action against your opponent's most likely attack, but it's just mechanically different from its Zwinger. Another option is to keep the same technique as you originally intend to use, but use it in a different tactical situation. You can just parry any attacks to your dominant side, for instance, and then cut the Zwinger when your opponent switches to your non-dominant side, just like you would use the Zwinger in a non-cross-handed engagement. And this is a great way to make this particular technique still work, as it retains its amazing ability to close off your entire non-dominant side. The flip side is of course that you can no longer strike it preemptively, and you need to wait for your opponent to switch side with their attacks, or wait until their first attack goes through your non-dominant side. Anyway, for the final adaptation we need to talk about wrestling. Most grapples in messer fencing are meant to control the arm, and that can be divided into the inside of the arm and the outside. Normally, almost any action performed from your dominant side happens on the inside of your opponent's arm, and actions from your non-dominant side happen on the outside. Most grappling actions have an inside and an outside variant, but they are obviously mechanically different. Outside is usually better because it takes their offhand out of the equation by default. Of course, in a cross-handed fight, all of this becomes, well, a mess. As a general rule, I would suggest that in a cross-handed fight, you switch inside and outside. Often the opportunity for a grapple presents itself rather than being a conscious decision on your part, so you won't always have a say in whether you go outside or inside. What you should do is to use the mechanics you usually would use in that particular grapple, but be aware that you're now performing it on the inside rather than the outside, or vice versa. If you do get to decide when it's grappling time and you set up the wrestling exchange consciously, well then pick a setup that allows you to perform that wrestling action on the outside. Like for instance, an nedrusthoud from your non-dominant side, because it will usually land on your partner's inside of the arm, and then you can perform the grapple on the outside of the arm. Now, doing that will hopefully make the wrestling in a cross-handed fight make a little bit more sense. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something from it. Let me know in the comments whether your experiences mirror mine or whether they were completely different. Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe while you're at it. So this was the last truly messer focused video for the time being, because over the next few months I'd like to rather focus a bit more on some of the Landsknecht stuff, so with pikes and great swords. I've got some pretty cool stuff lined up for that, and I want to work on that a little bit. But if you're truly interested in Messer, why don't you check out Patreon, because I have an ongoing series with tutorials for all of Lekker's Hauptstücke there, so if you're interested, check that one out. And speaking of Patreon, it's actually quite difficult to create HEMA-related content nowadays, as the algorithm isn't all that friendly towards niche hobbies such as ours. So a huge debt of gratitude is owed to those people who've already decided to support me on Patreon. Thank you very much. For you and for everyone else, I hope to all see you for the next video, and until then, cheers.